Good day, everyone. Today's topic is brutally punish scholar's mate and early queen attacks. We'll learn how to spot these beginner traps fast, shut them down, and turn them into winning positions for ourselves. First of all, you are probably familiar with the scholar's checkmate. This is something white can try here. After pawn to e4 and pawn to e5, white can play queen to h5, immediately attacking the pawn on e5. This gives white the first chance to try and trick you. For example, if you casually play pawn to g6, that would be a huge blunder. White would simply capture pawn on e5 with the queen, attacking both the king and the rook, winning the game instantly. Of course, that is not what you should do, so after white plays queen to h5, attacking the pawn on e5, you must defend it. That is why black plays knight to c6, now guarding the pawn on e5, but white continues the attack with bishop to c4. Now the threat becomes serious. White is threatening queen takes on f7, aiming for checkmate. For example, one common mistake by black would be playing knight to f6, attacking the queen. However, white would simply move forward with queen takes on f7, delivering what is known as the scholar's checkmate. Of course, you definitely do not want to allow that. Instead, black needs to block the diagonal by playing pawn to g6. At first, it may seem like that is the end of white's early attack. You have secured yourself against the scholar's checkmate, refuted white's premature aggression, and everything looks safe. But it is not that simple. In fact, many players, even some strong ones, keep falling into problems in this variation. After black plays pawn to g6, white simply retreats the queen to f3. White keeps a somewhat active attacking position, and it seems like nothing bad really happened to white. Moreover, after black now tries to cover the pawn on f7, because queen takes on f7 is still a real threat. With a move like knight to f6, black is left with weaknesses around the king's side. After you castle, white can still try to take advantage of the situation in the future. For example, white might play pawn to d3, then bishop to g5, and perhaps later move the knight to d5. Not immediately, but as part of a longer-term plan. Even if white's quick attempt at a checkmate with the queen did not work in the first four moves, they often switch to building up a slower, long-term attack instead. This system was actually played quite often by Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura with the white pieces. Nowadays, Grandmaster Alireza Firouzja plays it in blitz games, and even Magnus Carlsen has tried it once. In that game, Magnus actually achieved a winning position, although he eventually lost. So, as simple as it might look at first, this line is not just for beginners. Let's figure out how to punish white's unsound attack. After you play knight to f6, white must watch out for your threat of knight to d4, which attacks both white's queen and the pawn on c2. To prevent that, white usually plays either pawn to c3 or knight to e2. Knight to e2 is the better option, as it develops a piece and controls the d4 square. In response, since your pawn is already on g6, focus on developing your bishop and securing your king's side. When white plays pawn to d3 next, many players make the mistake of playing pawn to d6 immediately. But it is better to castle first, making sure your king is safe before doing anything else. Usually, white will continue by playing bishop to g5, aiming to create a pin on your knight and increase the pressure on your position. If you are unsure how to handle this, it can feel quite annoying. What I recommend is that as soon as white plays bishop to g5, you immediately respond with pawn to h6. If white tries to exchange pieces here by capturing on f6, that is not a problem at all. You can trade queens if you wish, or recapture with your bishop. Either way, your position remains completely safe and solid. However, in most cases, white will not exchange. Instead, they usually move the bishop back to h4, trying to maintain the pin. Strangely enough, that move, bishop to h4, is actually a decisive mistake for white. If you know how to punish it correctly, you can completely crush white from this point onward. By playing the move pawn to g5, you actively continue expanding on the king's side, directly challenging white's bishop. This forces white's bishop to retreat all the way back to the square g3, where it becomes completely restricted. Once the bishop reaches this position, it is essentially trapped. It has no further active squares to move to, and no useful role in white's position. In that sense, you have successfully neutralized one of white's key pieces, limiting their attacking options and gaining additional space on the king's side. While pushing a pawn so far forward might seem risky because it creates a potential weakness, in this case, you do not need to worry. You are already ahead in development. Your pieces are more active and better coordinated than white's. White is not in a position to take advantage of this slight structural weakness because they are still behind in development and lack immediate threats. With a strong position, shift your focus to the center. When attacked on the flank, the classical response is a central strike, as it controls the board and can turn defense into offense. Once your pieces are developed and your king is safe, focus on counterattacking the center. This lets you use your lead in development, pressure white's king, and turn a small edge into a winning advantage. You can strike in the center with the move pawn to d5. That is exactly why we avoided playing pawn to d6 earlier, because in some positions, you want to have the option to push pawn to d5 right away and hit in the center. This move allows you to attack both white's bishop and the pawn on e4. Now, what can white do about that? At first glance, it looks like you can simply capture the pawn on e4. White will capture back, of course. You cannot immediately recapture the pawn because it is defended twice, by white's queen and white's bishop. However, you have an interesting intermediate move, bishop to g4, attacking the queen. Because you inserted this in-between move with bishop to g4, now white's queen has to move. The only available square for the queen is e3. Now you have several good options. One simple and effective choice would be to capture the pawn on e4. That is perfectly fine. Now the pawn on e4 is no longer defended enough, so you can capture it, and that is completely fine. But in this particular position, there is an even stronger idea, moving the knight to the square d4. With the move knight to d4, you want to fully open up the center so you can start aiming at white's king right away. The goal is to take advantage of white's underdeveloped position and launch a direct attack. Instead of white trying to checkmate you early in the game, now you turn the tables. You are the one going for a checkmate in the opening. White has no real choice but to capture your knight on the square d4. If white does not, both your knight and other pieces are attacking critical points, so ignoring it is not an option. After white captures your knight, you recapture. By doing this, you achieve an important result. The e-file becomes completely open, allowing you to attack along that file. Now white's queen is under attack, so white will capture back. At that moment, you play rook to e8 with check to white's king. Now white's king must move. Now, there are not too many good options for white. If white plays king to d2, it fails to a small but very effective tactic, knight to e4 with check to the king. This creates a discovered attack on white's queen, as your bishop suddenly becomes extremely powerful. That simply loses for white. Let's take that back. Instead, your opponent will most likely play king to f1, trying to put the king in a safer position. Now comes a truly spectacular combination. Bishop to e2 with check. After white's king moves to g1, you play this sneaky and surprising move, knight to d7. That's a move most opponents will completely overlook, simply because it is very difficult to calculate in advance. The hidden trick is that white's queen now gets trapped right in the middle of the board. Your knight on d7 takes away escape squares, your rook covers the entire e-file, and now white's queen has nowhere to go. White is forced to trade the queen for your bishop, and so, you win the game by winning white's queen in this brilliant sequence. Thanks for watching.